You should see the little red buttons, so you can go ahead.
All right, good. Thank you, Sharon. And
Mhm.
thank you to all of you who are attending this evening. I'm always honored and impressed when people take their time to come and to learn about these things and to participate, because that's what it really takes is I don't want to say an army, a concerned group of us together to work on these issues. So I don't know if all of you, I know that most of you at least were at the session that we did last week. So we're not going to cover a lot of those things again. So tonight we're going to look at the Shoreland Advisors 101. So I will present a big part of it. We also have Keith Manlove, and he's going to present sort of his view of how things have worked for him. So I'm going to jump in here. So I used the same slide last week. I use this slide a lot because I think it really helps us sort of get in the mindset of why we're doing this and why this matters to us. And what it is that we are attached, we are emotionally, economically, physically, through our family, socially, we're connected to water. And I think especially as Minnesotans, it's a big part of our identity. So even people who don't live on the water, this is a big part of who we are as a state. And so it means something to us. And so it's important that we come together on this. So that's why I'm glad you're here. So what do we mean when we say shoreland advisors? So you all signed up for this class, so that's a good start, right? But I don't know, maybe some of you are kind of scratching your heads about what does that mean? So first I'm going to do a little bit of background and go back to sort of the late part of 2018. I was contacted by Itasca County, and they wanted to start a program where they would train volunteers to go out on request to meet with property owners to have a conversation about what they might do, what those property owners might do on their shoreline to make a positive change for the lake. And so I worked with Itasca County for, I don't know, well, I'm still working with them some, I guess, but we did a couple of classes in 2019. And so their program is still very young as well. But then Sharon and Sally from Extension had heard about the Itasca program and said, hey, we want to try that out here. So that's sort of where it came from. So what it is, we are training volunteers to be coaches, to go out to people's shorelines with them and have a conversation. The goal is really to protect and improve our water, right? Our lakes and our rivers, our wetlands, all of our waters, by pairing those volunteer advisors, the shoreline advisors, with the property owners. And the way that will happen is by looking at what kind of alternatives are possible on that piece of land. So it's voluntary on both sides. So the people who are being volunteers, which, you know, by the end of the evening, hopefully, you know, if you want to be a volunteer or not, that is voluntary. And then on the property owner side, that is voluntary if they choose to invite someone to their home to give them some input. Okay. So what does it look like? So the roles and responsibilities that the volunteers on the Shoreline Advisors side, so that will be you guys, you would sign up with the Hubbard County COLA, the Coalition of Lake Association. So that's Sharon, right? Sharon would work with you to get signed up. You're going to say, yes, I'm in, I want to do this. Then they will connect you. Sharon and the COLA folks will connect you with people who contact them and say, I would like someone to come out to my property. So they're kind of being that, the intermediary there to make that connection happen. The communication at first would be through email. So Sharon would give the property owner your email address, and then there would be an email exchange. Whenever you are comfortable with meeting that on both sides, then you would meet face to face on the property and go over the property and have that conversation. Your job would be to provide advice, provide resources, provide some ideas, look at things a little bit differently maybe than they are. You are not expected to be the experts on everything, and you're definitely not expected to do the projects for them. It's a matter of giving them some ideas about what they could change on their property. And I also put short-term commitment. I can't really define what that means, but you're not signing on to something with any one property owner that says, I'm going to be with them all the way through their project. You meet with them, you give them ideas. If at that point you want to be done with that, then you're done with that. I think every case is a little bit different. So it's sort of hard to put stiff sideboards on it will be like this and this and this. I think every case is going to be kind of up to the shoreline property owner and to the volunteer going out. So we'll figure that out as we go. So part of my presentation tonight will be about trying to give you a broader understanding of the concepts and some of the details of what you need to know to work with folks on the ground. The other part of it is how to work with folks on the ground. And so as I go through this evening, Keith and I both will kind of slide between those two things. So it just blends together, I think. But there are definitely those two different ideas or two different lines of information going there. But along with the first one of having that broader understanding of how things work, I really think that to do a good job as a shoreline volunteer, you need to have a good understanding, a solid foundation in these three concepts. And we touched on them last week. It's systems thinking or ecosystems thinking, biodiversity, and cumulative effects. So I'll go through those here. Okay, I just put this slide up to scare you. So don't be too scared on this one, right? But the takeaway here is that systems thinking is it is complex. And the reason that systems thinking is not the way we do business every day in the world of natural resources is because it's complex. You say, well, when I was over there, I did these two things and it worked beautifully, but I did those two things here and it didn't work because there are so many variables, right? Variables that we can't control. And so that's part of the whole ecosystem thinking. There's a lot of changes going on that are human induced and changes going on that are natural. That we either we still don't understand every little detail about how the biology of things works, right? I mean, there are still probably thousands of species of insects we have not even identified, right? We have no idea what they need in the world. You know, what are their habitat requirements? We don't even know these things yet. So how do we manage for those things? So it's very complex. The important thing is that I need you to understand that that is complex. I don't need you to understand everything about how ecosystems work, but to understand that we live in systems and that the work that we're doing is based on those systems, that we can only control so much and that we always have to be aware of those other influences going on around us. So if we break that down into what that looks like for healthy lake versus unhealthy lake, right? We can think of it in those terms because both part of their watershed, part of their ecosystem, both having some influences from all these outside sources. But the lake on the left there, the healthy ecosystem, things are in balance. Remember last week we talked about ecosystems being in balance. And when we pull one string and throw off the balance, everything else is going to adjust until it comes back into balance. The thing with ecosystems, and this really gets into that cumulative impacts, is an ecosystem can tolerate a certain amount of shifting, right? That's a natural thing. Ecosystems are always shifting because things are changing constantly. So they shift and adjust and shift and adjust. They're not static. They're dynamic systems, but they are in balance. But when we make huge changes, for example, say the scenario on the right there, if we introduce way too much nitrogen or phosphorus or other pollutants too much into the system at one time, then it's way out of whack. And it's too much of an impact that it can't balance itself out. Then we've upset the system and we move into an unhealthy condition. So we just have to be aware of where we are as systems. So remember, we're part of these watersheds, right? The big basins are the different colors, and then the smaller watersheds that Hubbard County has 3 of those of the 80 major watersheds. We're part of 3 of those. And if we look at those here, there's a lot of information here. You don't need to read all this, but if you go back through the, when we have this as a recording, then you might want to get these details. But for tonight, just really to focus on the fact that we have those 3 major watersheds within the county. And whenever you are working in with a homeowner, say you've been invited out and you're working with someone on their property, it would behoove you to know which watershed, which major watershed you're in, and some idea of how that's impacting the lake that you're going to. So I used this example last week that we had, here I can still use my cursor, I think. Yeah, here that we had Fishhook Lake here, but if we followed that up, here the river goes all the way across and up into here, goes across the county line, goes all the way up into Becker County, and everything that happens all the way along that route within that watershed has the potential to impact Fishhook Lake. So we have to be aware of what's going on upstream and to some degree also downstream in terms of things being able, whatever can move up. Lots of things can move downstream. Some things, you know, think about Asian carp. Hopefully we never see those in Hubbard County, but those sorts of things can move upstream as well. Okay, so cumulative effects, and I mentioned that earlier, but I want to read the official definition here. So changes to economic, environmental, and social values caused by the combined effect of past, present, and reasonably foreseeable actions and events. So it's that combined effect. So those actions can have either positive or negative effects on values, or in our case, on our lake or stream. So I've argued a few times with some friends of mine who grew up in my area in the old days, right? Back in the old days, all the cows just went down to the lake to drink. And, you know, they didn't just drink while they were there. They probably left some things while they were there too. And my friends say, we've always had cows in the lake. They don't hurt anything. Well, right, it's cumulative impacts. So if you have 1 or 2 cows in a big lake, you're not going to see that impact because there is that balance going on. That system can handle a little bit. But if you have a lot of cows, or if you have a few cows and a lot of leaking septic systems, right, or a lot of runoff coming in off of the roads and the properties, these things start to add up together and the ecosystem is overwhelmed. And then we start seeing problems that we have trouble reversing. So this is sort of the point that we are at in Hubbard County. Our lakes in Hubbard County are in good shape, and we want to keep them that way. So we don't want to upset the balance so much that we can't get it back, or that it's a really expensive long-term thing to get it back. It's much smarter to protect them and keep it from ever getting to that point. So that's where we are. I also want to take the opportunity to say that when you're meeting with property owners, they have, each of us has our own different values. And for some people, one of the values that will ring true to them is the economic impact that this has on their property value. So I've included these studies just as examples of what happens. So some of these are aquatic invasive species. And the studies show that when you get an aquatic invasive species, such as Eurasian water milfoil, in the case of this study, and this was done in Wisconsin. So a lake is infested with Eurasian water milfoil, and the researchers said, well, what happens to property values? Does that have an impact? Well, what they found was what you would expect. Yes, it has a big impact on property values. I think it was 13 or 19, 13% decrease in property values when a lake was infested with Eurasian water milfoil. This makes sense, right? When you go to buy a property, you want to know those things. What is the water like? Is it full of lots of excessive vegetation, or is it clear and easy to navigate? It makes a difference. And so we see that in property values. Not just in Wisconsin, right? Here's a study that did a similar thing. It was in Vermont. And also not just aquatic invasive species. There are also studies that relate it to water clarity. So when the water clarity declines, property values decline. So this study was done at Bemidji State University after it was based on a study that was done in Maine. And then there's another one here that was done in Chesapeake Bay. They show that the same things. Water quality, including aquatic invasive species, affects your property values. And so A lot of times I talk to people and they just aren't interested in making any changes. But when we talk about how this affects their property value, then they start listening. So it depends on what a person's values are. Okay. So you might remember this from last week. We talked about as we change from that upper left quadrant where we had no disturbance and how the runoff and evaporation and infiltration happened. And then as we developed, what happened to those? We changed those numbers. Instead of the water soaking into the ground and very little running off, we flip that on its head and a lot of it runs off and very little of it, or relatively little of it, soaks into the ground. And when it runs across the surface of the water, remember, it carries pollution with it. So we want to decrease that water moving across the surface. So here's another way to look at that. So if we have that on the left there, we have the undisturbed site. In the middle is the traditional old family style cabin. And on the right is the big, heavily developed lake lot. So how do those three scenarios look if we think about minimizing our unwanted pollution into the lake? So how much water is running off, that stormwater runoff? What are those nutrients, the phosphorus, the nitrogen, what's washing in that wasn't before, and then sediment, just the dirt. How much dirt is getting into the lake? So if we look at those, and in this one, you look at this in the upper left, those three different colors, right? Runoff volume is sort of a maroon, and then the phosphorus inputs in the yellow, and then sediment inputs in black. In that first scenario, that's our baseline. So we say there's no disturbance, so we have this much of each one of those things, right? These little arrows at the bottom of that photo. We have that much. That's our baseline data. So what happens when we build that little cabin? We've cleared some vegetation. We left the aquatic vegetation. We left most of the trees. We cleared a little bit in the front. So what happened? What we see is that we didn't change the runoff volume or the phosphorus very much, but we changed the sediment. So there's more water moving across the land faster. So it's picking up some dirt with it, carrying it in. It's not a huge change, but again, think about if there's one of these on a lake, no big deal. But then those cumulative impacts, it adds up when we start doing this all the way around the lake. So what do you think happens on this lot on the right? Now look at that. It's a big structure, right? So all of that roof is impervious surface. So all that water has to go somewhere else. And then you see sort of some, I can move my cursor here. You've got some heavy duty rock, riprap, no lawn here. And then even the lawn and the walkway down the middle, a lot of times when we have small lawn areas, they get so compacted because we're on them so much that they don't, the water doesn't soak into them. They basically become nearly impervious themselves. And look, we've lost all the vegetation in the lake itself, in the water. So let's see what happens here. It's sort of frightening, isn't it? Right? The runoff volume has gone up 5 times. The amount of phosphorus has gone up 6 times, and the sediment has gone up 18 times. So again, if we do this one time on one lake, not a big deal. But we start seeing these kind of impacts, these kind of developments all the way around the lakes, then we have a big problem. So last week we talked about this. What are we going to do about it? We're not going to tear down our houses. We're not going to tell people to move away from the lake, right? That's not going to happen. And so we need to find a way to mimic the system as it was before we were here. So we need to find a way to slow that water down, right? Slow the flow and hold it on the landscape. So we want the ecosystem to be able to go back to what it was before, not so much running off, but hold it on our site. We want it, when we hold it on our site, we can let it soak in, soaks into the ground. It fills up the aquifers beneath our feet, right? That's our groundwater. And then the plants take some of that up and it goes up into the atmosphere as transpiration. So we mimic a natural system. So I'm going to switch right now to Keith's presentation. And Keith is a master gardener, and he's been doing a lot of this work in, I don't know, he can tell you, but I know on Long Lake. So he's sort of got the upper hand here. He's got the experience. So we're going to listen to Keith and learn from his experience. So go ahead, Keith.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. And so it's like, and if Terry and I had spent 10 minutes and rehearsed this together, but so just to play off what she talked about as far as what is expected of a shoreline advisor, and I would have to say, pretty much that's what I saw, what she described. I mean, people would contact me. Here's my email address. People would contact me, and you'd email back and forth a couple times. You'd set a date, and I would typically spend about an hour, maybe less, on the property talking to the people. Probably half the time there was some sort of follow-up where I would go off and say, hey, here's some plans you could consider, and give them some ideas. And then that's been it, and there has been a couple of people that I've worked a little bit more with. But in general, it's as advertised by Karen. And so now over to my presentation, the changing lakeshore. As it says, I am a University of Minnesota Master Gardener, and this is a presentation about change, right? We didn't get from the picture on the left to the picture on the right in one step. If you look at the picture on the left, it's kind of the way cabins used to be. They were small structures. Most of the natural vegetation was there. Most of the shoreline was undeveloped. And then you see what we see today, where these large stately homes, you got right to the shore, turf grass lawns. Most of the native vegetation has been removed. And as Karen just took us through, we see increased nutrient pollution and increased runoff. And this is where, and so I've talked about, this is a presentation about change. Well, there's more changes coming. People are starting to get the idea that they have to make decisions based on how those decisions impact the lake. And as they make those changes, or as these changes come, people are going to have questions. They're going to be looking for guidance, and that's where we come in. And also, I guess a little bit playing off something that Terry said or Karen said, is that University of Wisconsin and Wisconsin DNR study showed that you have a natural lot, so an undeveloped lot, will say versus a typical lot on a developed lake, we'll see a 700% increase in the amount of phosphorus pollution that's washing into the lake. And well, is that a lot? Well, I don't know, but a pound of phosphorus can feed 500 pounds of algae. And so, that is, phosphorus is one of the real deadlies for us. Next.
Okay, Karen's doing that.
Yes. Maybe she's doing it.
Okay.
All right. So how did we get here? Well, cabin life in Minnesota began in the late 50s. And this was sort of precipitated by the completion of I-35 and Interstate 94, which gave people, a way to get to the north. You also saw the post-World War II economic boom. People that had been coming up to resorts for the last 20, 30 years, all of a sudden had disposable income. They had a way to get there, and they started buying cabins. And these cabins were mostly small cabins, kind of like the first picture we saw on the first slide, with very lightly developed shorelines. And from 1954 to 1967, the number of lakeshore cabins in Minnesota increased by 88%. However, there were no rules. It was sort of the wild, wild north out here. And so finally in 1969, they passed the Minnesota Shoreline Management Act. And, prior to that, there were no rules regarding septic. People were dumping raw sewage right into the lakes. There were 50-foot lots. There was no rules about, you could build right on top of the water if you wanted to. And so at any rate, in 1969, they sort of formalized a set of rules. And not all rules are necessarily, not all changes are necessarily directly related to the lake. Another change that we've seen was in 1972, the insecticide DDT was banned. From 1967 to 1982, as we continue our march towards, progress, the lakeshore cabins in Minnesota increased around 74%. And there was an increase in year-round homes, and with also the lawn to shore landscaping. So all of a sudden we were moving from the small cabins to large year-round homes, large cabins, much more developed shorelines. Next. And another change that came our way in 1987, lead shot was banned. We still have not banned lead fishing tackle, and a single split shot sinker, if it's swallowed by a loon, will kill a loon, but it's in the works, but it's not there yet. But at any rate, they banned lead shot. And then in 1989, the Minnesota shoreland rules were updated, and that included increased agricultural use, enhanced performance standards, mostly for septics, and then protections for the shore and the bluff zones. And then more changes from 1990 to present. What we've seen is an increase in lakeshore development, both the size and the quantity. People aren't building little cabins, they're building great big places. We've seen the increase in lake recreation, both the size and quantity, the number of boats that are on the lake, the size of the boats that are on the lake, the amount of time they're on the lake. And we've seen an associated decrease in the amount of natural shoreline. And I've made several visits to people on Long Lake. I actually have expanded my sphere of influence. I've branched out to Fifth Crow Wing, for those of you in Hubbard County. And and this was part of a Master Gardener project. And, majority of the people that I've talked to, they had concerns about erosion, either on the lot or down at the shore. And invariably, the erosion is caused, or it's a result of the fact that most of the native vegetation has been removed. So they've got this turf grass lawn, and now water, rather than infiltrating into the water table because you have natural vegetation, they've got a turf grass lawn that it just allows water to just flow right into the lake, or it picks up speed. And that is typically the biggest problem that I've encountered when I'm talking to people. And I'm a little bit sheepish when it's like, well, this is the sum total of my recommendation. And that's, why don't you mow less? You point at it and it's like, you don't walk over there. There's nothing over there. Why are you mowing that? And I have gotten a couple people, to embrace the concept, and they're pleased with what they're seeing, and they're also pleased with the reduction in time and labor that they're putting into to mowing what was a pretty extensive lot. Next. And so in summary, how we use and care for our lakes continues to change. Our lakes are definitely under increased pressure. And as we learn more, one thing that is encouraging is that Minnesota has shown they will take action. Although it's been a long time, they've made several runs at it. The initial shoreline legislation was a bipartisan action, and now basically partisan politics, they can't get further rules passed. However, in 2017, the DNR introduced the Shoreline Model Ordinance, which actually has wording in there that talks about shoreland plants and what you can do to lots and so forth. I mean, it's not legislated, it's just suggestions at this point. But the point of that is that increased shoreline restrictions could very well be in our future. And again, this is where shoreland advisors come in, as if, when these, as people start to have questions, especially if there's increase or there's new legislation, people are going to have questions, people are going to need guidance, and having a team of trained people who've been out doing this is going to be a really, really valuable resource. And finally, just a plug. I've got questions for me. I can be reached at lakefriendlygardening@gmail.com. And I have a YouTube channel. There's not a lot out there yet. I am a one-man show, but it's if you go search on YouTube, Lake Friendly Gardening, I think I got 3 videos out there, and we got 1 in the can that we're working on. And that's all I got.
Excellent. Thank you, Keith. It's really nice to have that, your lens to look at that from, because that's what we're asking people to do, is to go out and meet with folks and talk to them about what's happening on their shoreline and make those recommendations, if they're well received or not, right? People need to hear what the truth is. So
right, and you pointed this out, but you are being invited, right? You're not crashing onto their property and start telling them how they need to run their lives. They're inviting you, so they want to hear what you have to say.
that's right. Yeah, good point. And for the YouTube channel, we do have that on the resource sheet. So Sharon's going to send that out probably tomorrow, I think. So
Yes.
so everybody will get that. So, thank you, Keith.
Yep.
Okay, so what's it look like, right? You get invited to come out to somebody's shoreline, and what do? Well, during a pandemic, right, there are going to be some weird things that you and the property owner will work that out about. If you're wearing masks, you should stay 6 feet apart. I say you should stay outside, but that's really for the two of you, or for, you know, maybe it's a couple or a family that invites you out. It's between you and them to work out. So I'm not going to tell you what to do there, other than we need to be aware of it. So when you get there, I'm going to recommend that you walk the property, right? Look at what's going on in their property. Start taking note of, is there erosion? Is there a lot of impervious, those hard surfaces? Where's the water going? Where are the downspouts? What's the lakeshore look like? Is there a lot of erosion? Are there some gullies? Just start taking notes of what's going on. Is it being mowed right down to the edge? While you're doing that, this is really important. I need you to listen to what they're saying. Listen to what their needs and their wishes are, because it goes back to their values. We need to know what they want their property to look like. If we get to a point down the road where Minnesota mandates some changes and things have to be changed, different ballgame. But right now, this is voluntary. We're asking them to consider making some changes for the good of our common resource. So we want to know what's important to them. Is it important to them that they be able to see down to the edge of the water where they have a sand beach, where they want to be able to sit on the deck and watch the grandkids swimming? If that's important to them, make sure that's part of your recommendations, right? That whatever you recommend doesn't conflict with that. You want to know what their value is. If they're concerned about that shoreline erosion more than anything else, focus on that. If you understand that they are not going to do any big projects, that they're looking for smaller things, work with that. But listen to understand. I always think about Stephen Covey, right? The seven, I can't even say it, something for effective, anyway.
7 habits of highly effective people.
Thank you. That's exactly it. And one of them is seek to understand before being understood. So listen to what they want and then respond with compatible recommendations. So I can't emphasize that enough. Okay, so look for changes that you could recommend that fit into their values. Provide some advice and some resources, right? We have resources for you. At the end, we'll share that, and then it will also be on the resource sheet that you get. There's a great big binder. It's 400 and some pages with all kinds of resources in there for you. And then other things that we've provided for you as well. So you're going to have some resources, but again, you are not expected to be the expert. And it's always okay to say, I'm not really sure about that, but let's find out, right? If they say, I'd like to put in a rain garden, but I don't know how to do it. You say, well, either I have that expertise, I can help you with that, or I don't have that expertise, and here's where we're going to go to get that. I can refer you to this resource, this person, this pamphlet. So we have those things available. And then follow through. Don't leave somebody hanging, looking for you to come back and you don't come back. So when you're out there, remember this last week I said, when it's raining, put on your yellow slicker and go out and look at the property. Well, you're maybe not going to go out there on somebody else's property when it's raining, but try to think like the water, right? Think about if it were raining while you were there, where would that water be running? You can get some good ideas about this, and you're going to get better at it as you visit properties and you start noticing. Like, I can't not notice things like look at those downspouts. That goes right over there. And then it goes right down the driveway and that pours right into the lake. I can't not see those things. And as you start doing this more, you'll get to the point where you can't see it either, where you can't not see it either. And maybe you'll swear at me at some point for that, but I don't think you will, because that's where we start being able to make a difference. If we can identify where the problem areas are, then we can make recommendations for positive change. So look for where the issues are, right? What kind of vegetation is there? You can talk to them about septic issues. You're probably, hopefully, if things aren't going to be so bad that there's a visual problem, but you could talk to them, make sure that they're doing good upkeep, good maintenance on their septic. Is there shoreline erosion? Is there a lot of impervious surfaces? And what can we do about those things? So we talked last time about some practices that might apply. So now we're looking at you guys being the ones, if it's appropriate, making recommendations for these things on somebody else's property. So we're going to kind of come at it from a different angle. But in general, when we're talking about the runoff, what we want to do is intercept that water. Anything that's running over the land, we want to intercept it before it gets to the lake or the river. We want to stop it and hold it back on the ground and let it soak in. So in this picture, right, there's water is going to run off of that impervious surface of that path, and then it's going to go into that area where it's all trampled down and there's no vegetation, and it's going to go right past that and right into the lake. We could change that pretty easily, right? We could put some rain garden maybe right along there. If not that, at least plant some vegetation there that will slow that water down. So we want to find those sorts of opportunities and encourage the landowners to make changes there. Okay, also need to think about sort of the from the upland area down to the water, think about these different areas. So if you look at the aquatic area, right, what's in the water? It's what's always underwater. And then there's the upland, right, high and dry, where your house and your buildings are, hopefully high and dry, right? And then sometimes, not always, but sometimes we have this wet area in between. It's sort of swampy, wetlandy, marshy area in between those two. Not always. That's where you get a whole different community of plants growing. So you want to think about on the site that you're visiting, what does that look like? How much of what's going on in the water, and is there that wet transitional sort of area? And then how much of it is upland area? Also make sure that on the lakes that you work on, you're going to want to find out where the ordinary high water level is. And if you don't know that, I'd say work with your lake association to find that out, or work with the DNR to find that out. The DNR sets those. But that's the mark that at the ordinary high water level, below that, if you do any work at all, you need to have a DNR permit. So it's important to know where that is. Another thing that I always encourage people to know about is this line of sight. So if you're standing on the deck with the people you're visiting, if you're on an upper story deck, or if there's a lower deck, if a line of sight to the water is important to them, make sure that's part of your plan, right? This scenario has quite a slope to it. So you could plant some pretty tall vegetation down at the shoreline and still be able to see over it. If you don't have that much slope, if you don't have a second story deck, right, and people want to be able to see to the water, you have to be able to work with people. So just think about that in terms of, what are the sight lines? If I'm standing here, what can I see? And what does the landowner want to see or not want to see? Sometimes we want to screen things out as well. So think about sight lines. Okay, so you're out on a site visit and you think maybe rain gardens are something that the landowner might be interested in doing here. So what are they? You don't need to know all of the details of how to install these, even all the details that I'll go through tonight. It's more than you'll need to have at your fingertips, but to know where to go to get it is a good plan, right? And we've got that in the resources. So what is it again? It's just that recessed garden that we put in, that we intentionally site in a location where the water runs into it. We put it where the water flows so that it holds the water. It captures the water, and then that water can soak into the ground or get taken up by the plants. The idea is slow the flow, right? Keep that water from going overland and into the lake. So we're going to capture the water. In this scenario, you can see coming off of the house on the left side here, have to look up here to do this, but there is water coming off of the driveway. It ends up going to the gutter. In this case, you know, we're in an urban setting and it goes right down the gutter and into the storm drain. So we're not trying to capture every drop of water. At least we don't have to feel like we need to. If we can, that'd be great. But here, the water coming off of this part of the house, they've put a rain garden in here so that we can capture that water. We're capturing some of the water, not all or nothing. We do something no matter what. We want that water to soak into the ground. The plants can take it up. It's going to filter some of those pollutants out, and less water going down the storm drain or directly into the lake. So we try to capture some water and minimize what runs off of our property. Okay, so here's kind of a cross section. If I have a rain garden and I slice down through the dirt and I look at it from the side, looking from below ground, so you see my plants there in the top. This is about 6 inches deep, right? So the amount the amount of water, if the thing's completely full, it would hold 6 inches of water in this design, right? And that's sort of a rule of thumb, 6 to 8 inches. And let's see, the bottom of that is as flat as we can get it because we're maximizing how much water we can store in this. So here's my little animation. It's going to start raining, then it rains. What happens when it rains? Then some water runs in, comes across the ground, water runs into the rain garden and it fills up. Then it stops raining. What happens to that water? It soaks down into the ground. Some of that water then goes up, it evaporates off, gets taken up by plants through evapotranspiration, or it sinks down into the ground, goes down into the aquifers. So all of the water that we captured there isn't running off and going into the lake. So that's what we're going for. Rain gardens are not. Water gardens are ponds. We want rain gardens to be dry within 48 hours of the end of the rain. We want them to dry up. They're not solutions for poorly drained areas. They need to be up high and dry, and they are not mosquito breeding hotspots. One of your resources is this, this guide. It's a really simple to follow guide of how to build a rain garden. So I would really lean on that if you are going to try any of these. I would also say work with your soil and water conservation district and work with Sharon at the COLA and see if there are some resources there as well. Okay, so here's an example, right? Here's my garage. I've got a downspout coming off of the corner of the garage right here. And on my house, I've got a downspout coming off right here. It's sort of directed out into the front yard. But if you look, you can sort of see right here, there's a bit of a swale. Looks like the grass doesn't do so well, maybe because it's wet too much, but it looks like the water could run through there. So some of this, you almost have to use your imagination, right? This is part of that experience of when you start going out and looking at sites, you think, oh, I think that I could envision something happening there. So in this scenario, we want to capture that water coming from the downspout. So we can capture not just off of the garage, which is already pointed over that way, but the one coming off of the house. Doesn't take a whole lot to redirect a downspout. So that's where we could place a rain garden in that area right there. So you have to think about where the water is flowing. Okay, identifying those potential sites. Water is going to flow downhill. So you've got to get downslope of where the water is coming off of the house. You also have to think about what are the setback criteria. And you might need more than one rain garden. Now, this is a joke because in my family, we say need is such a funny word, isn't it? But you may need more than one rain garden, but you might have sites for more than one. So think about that. Also think about what's coming across the property lines, because just like watersheds don't respect geographical boundaries, water running across our properties doesn't have any respect for our property boundaries either. So water from your neighbor's property might be running into your lot or vice versa. So when you start thinking about how big does this need to be, how much water comes this way, where does it come from? It might come from your neighbors as well. Okay, this just gives you those setbacks. And these are sort of rule of thumb. I mean, I wouldn't say that these are locked or written in stone, but these are good recommendations. You want to stay away from your wellhead, right? You definitely want to stay away from your septic field where your drain field is. We don't want to add water to that area. We don't want to build these right up against your house. If you have a slab, it's not as critical, but if you have a basement, we don't want to put a lot of water right up against there. We want to keep it away from that. Property lines. The most important thing on this slide is that if you are going to do any digging at all, or if you are going to recommend that the property owner do any digging, make sure that Go for One gets called so we don't have any accidents. So just call Go for One before you dig. Okay, you also want to put these things on a gentle slope. We're not going to put these on hillsides, right? It has to be fairly gentle. Again, not areas that are already wet. You got to be above the water table so that that water has somewhere to soak in. And we don't want to put them in places where the soil is really compacted because, again, the water won't soak in. We want it to be an area where the water is able to get into the soil. How do you calculate how big these things should be? Well, first of all, you want to think about what part of the roof or driveway or whatever it is, what part of it are you thinking about capturing water off of? It's not all the impervious surface in one lot. It's not all going to run the same direction. So think about what area are you trying to capture it from, and then do that calculation. In our example here, we've got 400 square feet, but the recommendation is that your rain garden, the square footage of your rain garden should be roughly 10% of the square footage you're draining. So in this case, 400 square feet, we want a rain garden that's only 40 square feet. But we also say that the range is from 5 to 30% of that area. So it's a big range. It makes a big difference. But the thing is if you build a rain garden and it's too big, what happens? Maybe it never gets completely full. That's okay. What happens if you build it too small and when you have a big rain, it fills up and then overflows? Still okay. As long as when you build it, you make sure that where it's going to overflow to is okay, right? Not back into your basement somehow. So if you don't worry about the size of it, right? These are rule of thumbs, not to worry about too much. Okay. This is just an example here. You see one in the foreground of the picture is a rain garden with some shady kind of plants in it. And then just beyond that, there's another one with sunnier plants that like sun more in them. You can make these things look however you want them to look by choosing what plants you want in them and based on your site conditions. Okay, just another example. Here's a better look at the house. The orange colored roof drains one direction. I'm having trouble getting my cursor on my screen. Okay, so up here, the orange colored roof is draining off into this rain garden. The blue color roof is draining off into this rain garden. So we just think about where's the water coming from? How are we going to slow it down? So that's it. Okay, moving on to shoreland buffers. This is just that strip of land between your lawn and the lake, right? And we're going to plant some plants in there to slow the flow, let that water infiltrate in. Also, we're creating some pollinator habitat, right? And okay, so we can argue about if they're pretty or not, but we'll come back to that later. When I think about shoreline restorations, I think about 3 different strategies. The first one is really if you're kind of new to a property, or yeah, I'd say if you're new to a property, you have that opportunity to say, there's still a lot of vegetation here. There's not a lot of disturbance. So you're starting with everything, everything intact. So you can edit what is there. So this goes back to, remember the slide with the line of sight on it? Think about if you're standing up on that upper deck on that house and you're looking out, what do you want to see? Do you want to be able to not see any trees and just see the lake? And at the same time, whoever's on the lake can see you. Or maybe it works for you to have a window in those trees where you can see it out, but you have some curtains, some shielding coming in. So not everybody can see you. So you think about what it is that you really want. So that would be editing. Number 2 is the one that Keith really talked about, was no mow, let it grow. If you have those kind of wet transitional areas where a lot of times the grass doesn't want to grow anyway, or you've got grass and it's hard to mow because it's wet all the time, stop mowing it and see what happens. Just give it a year, see what grows, because a lot of times we have native plants there if we give them a chance. So what it says here is it a weed bed or a gold mine? Well, within a year, you're going to find out. Now, you maybe don't know these plants well enough to identify them. That's when you call on your master gardeners or some other resources where you can identify those plants and find out what's coming. Maybe you don't have to plant anything. Maybe just getting out of there and letting it come back naturally will do the trick. So I'd say just stake it off, learn to identify what the weeds are so you can control those weeds. This is where you're going to call in those experts for plant identification. And then you're going to allow 1 or 2 years for this to see if it works or not. So if you're a patient person, you have the time to do this, I would say go for it. If you're not that patient, maybe this isn't your best option. This is what we like to tell people about native plants. When you plant them from seed, or even if you plant little plugs, little bitty plants, we tell people it takes time. The first year they sleep, the second year they creep, the third year they leap. So the first couple of years, you're maybe going to be scratching your head going, I am not sure this is working. Maybe I did something wrong here. Maybe this didn't work. But wait and give it at least until that third year and see what comes. Because what native plants are doing is putting down roots more than coming up. So while they're building root systems, we can't see it, but it's working. Okay, strategy number 3 is to add plants. This is what most of our cases are, right? That we're going to say, whatever's here isn't what we want. We want to change what's here, so we're going to do a planting. In some cases, we're just going to add a few plants to sort of increase our biodiversity, right? That's part of that ecosystem, that we want to have a healthy amount of biodiversity. That means we don't want everything to be the same. We don't want everything to be Kentucky bluegrass. We want to have some native plants and some native flowers and grasses, and not all the same kind, right? Even if you had a solid stand of wild bergamot, I would say still not the best for our ecosystems, because we want it to be diverse so that we can provide habitat for multiple species. So in this case, we see that it's been mowed for probably quite a long time. It's compacted. It's not growing good grass. The landowners are saying, what am I going to do here? I want to slow down this runoff. We can totally put in a healthy buffer across there where all that sand and spindly grass is. We're going to totally replant that and get some natives in there. Okay, visual appearance, these are things you will talk with the property owner about, what's important to them. Some of them will want that privacy screen, right? So either from the view from the water, they don't want everyone to be able to see in. Maybe sometimes it's screening out neighbors, so some of us have great neighbors, some of us maybe not. Sometimes you want to screen there. So you could do that. Also, a lot of people have rock riprap and some people don't love it. It's difficult usually to get the DNR to give you a permit to remove it. So the alternative to that is to plant into it. A lot of times there's heavy cloth underneath it. So you're going to have to be able to poke through there, like with a heavy rebar or something, to make some holes in there. If you decide to do that and plant some natives into that, you can see these have really softened up. And this is something we've done along my place on the road. They put in some riprap, the township did, and it has naturally grown in and it looks very nice. So something to consider. Also, you can talk to the homeowner about what they want it to look like. There's this sort of wild, tangly, natural look. There are also those country garden sort of very orderly looks, if somebody wants to put that kind of work into it. Some people like lots of flowers. Some people would rather have shrubs. Some people want it really tall. Some people want it short. Talk to them about what they want it to look like. Okay, this slide's about willow wattles. And I like this because I like to say willow wattles. It's just fun. You guys should try it. Go ahead, willow wattles. So what is a willow wattle? So we've got this shoreline erosion going on. So in a lot of cases, people would spend a lot of money to riprap that. And this does not need to be riprapped. I would say at this point in my career that I would say some sites absolutely need to be riprapped because there's way too much wave action, way too much wind, high water. You have to riprap, but those are far and away the exceptions. In a lot of cases, we can manage this erosion in other ways. Willow wattles is something to try if you want to go low cost and hands-on. I'll go through some slides here. Here we are out here. We've got a crew out cutting a bunch of willows. We're doing this while they're dormant, cutting some willows. And then you see here, we're putting them in long bundles. We've got the stakes that we've cut, we've laid them down. We're sort of staggering the ends of them so they're not all together. So we're making these long bundles and then we're binding them together with a twine. That's sort of what it looks like when we're done. We make many of these, and then we take them to the site and we install them. So here you can see the willow wattles right along in here. This actually is on a river, and you can see these wood stakes that we have angled in. We've toenailed them in front and back and front and back and front and back, so that they anchor that thing in, so that when the water, in this case moving water and moving downstream, there's a lot of force there to move those, but we anchor these things in so they don't move. So what happens? The idea is that these things buy us time, so that then we can get some good healthy vegetation growing there. Of course, the willow wattles aren't going to be there forever, although because we're doing these when they're dormant, we do find that sometimes in the spring, some of them start sprouting. They just, if they're the parts that are in contact with the soil, they will start sprouting. So you get some willows coming up from this. You can also do these with willows, dogwood, alder, different things that you can use to make these. So if you have a crew of people to work with and some time and some energy to do this project, you might want to try doing it like this. Here's just another picture of what that looks like. People also do willow stakes, so you can cut willows and dogwoods when they're dormant before the ground freezes and stab them down into the shoreline or higher up on the bank, and they will sprout in the spring. We have a lot of success with those. It's, you know, it's a cheap way to do it, and if some of them don't make it, you haven't lost much. Okay, aquatic planting. Just checking the time. Oh my goodness, I'm like running out of time. Okay, aquatic planting, you have to pay attention to what's going on there. If they want aquatic plants or not, you could work with them there, but you have to work with the DNR. If you're going to do aquatic planting, must contact the DNR. Here's just a shoreline buffer example using that same erosion picture. We went in, we got a crew in there, and we planted it. This is what it grew up to. Not everybody's favorite look, but we can work with the landowners to make it look the way they want. We also have to be aware of how the native plants are combating that erosion. So plants in the water, plants on the shoreline help bind that soil together. Here you can see the waves coming in, see the white caps out in the water, and then where it comes in, where it hits those bulrushes, it sort of just quits. So near shore, there's no wave action happening because that vegetation breaks it up. So a lot of times we've seen people wanting to remove that vegetation, but it's doing us a lot of good. Ice ridges, I said this last week too, make friends with the ice ridges when you can, because this is sort of an extreme example, right? Not the most attractive thing, but if you have something of a ridge there, it keeps that water from running right into the lake. So think about if there's a way that you could have some berm there that would stop that water. We also talked about grass swales, and in talking with Sharon, I found out that at Pine Haven camp, that part of the restoration projects that they've done in the last couple of years, they have some grass swales there. So you might want to check those out. So when you're on somebody's property, look for opportunities for these. Always, always, always encourage native plants because they have so many more benefits. And those trees. I know last week somebody asked about if conifers are better for capturing water than deciduous trees. And I started to research that and didn't get it done. But one thing that I found said that yes, if you have precipitation in the all year round when the deciduous trees don't have leaves. Okay, Restore the Shore. This is a program between Hubbard County COLA and the Hubbard Soil and Water Conservation District. This is an opportunity if you know of somebody that wants to do some planting next spring. Here's a way to buy some plants now, order some plants now through the COLA. So each lake will work with their own lake association, and then go through the COLA, put in an order, and get plants next May. So talk to Sharon about that. Just some other considerations that you want to look at when you're out there. Think about when you're walking that property, what are they doing with their, when they're mowing, when they're raking leaves, where is that detritus going, right? Where are the grass clippings and the leaves going? Not in the lake, right? We don't want that in the lake. Make sure they're not using a fertilizer with phosphorus in it. The law says we can't. Think about septic systems, think about pet waste, what's coming off of our impervious surfaces like the driveways. We want to make sure those are clean. Make sure they're aware of the AIS issues, the aquatic invasive species. And then if they're interested, try to get them to volunteer because we always need more people with eyes on the lake to keep track of things. So I think this seems sort of overwhelming, right? how are we going to do this? So if you're already like pushing away from your computer going, no way, I'm not doing this, take another look at it, because how are we going to solve these problems? We're going to do it like this, right? A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Same way with protecting our lakes, protecting our watersheds, protecting our property values. We do it one project at a time. There are several projects in your area here, and we just need more projects to have cumulative impacts, positive impacts from these projects. So back to the roles and responsibilities, just to revisit that. It's totally voluntary. You're not locked into any long-term commitments. So I hope that we're convincing you that this is something you want to give a try. You could do some visits to sites in your area. I think it would be great to have a tour of some of these sites, and I think you've done that in the past, but maybe with Shoreland volunteers, we could do some of that. And then just the key messages. I know I'm running out of time here, but the key messages, systems thinking. We have to think about these sites, these properties, these lakes in terms of the systems they are part of. Nothing has to be all or nothing. We have options on every site in terms of what changes we will make. Property owners have responsibilities. We all do. We have responsibilities to do the right thing. This one's important. You are not a marriage counselor. I don't know how many times I've been on a shoreline with a couple, and one of them wants to do a project and one of them doesn't, and they're looking at me going, what do we do? I'm like, no. You guys work that out. When you come to a consensus, then you call me again. But I don't have to do that part, and neither do you. As a volunteer, you don't have to do that part. We're trying to slow the flow, right? That's the big thing. We want to slow the flow, do it with native plants, because our lakes are in good shape and we want to keep them that way. So that's what I've got.
Well, thank you, Karen.
Yeah.
I'll get the gallery view and I'll check our chat. I'll turn the recording off.